I knew something had shifted the moment my daughter-in-law set the grocery bags on my kitchen counter and didn't say hello. Not good afternoon, not even a glance in my direction. She moved through my house the way people move through a parking garage, purposeful, eyes forward, as if the space belongs to everyone and no one at the same time. I was sitting at the table with my tea going cold, watching her unpack things I hadn't asked for and wouldn't eat. A bag of kale chips, 2 bottles of kombucha, a fancy jar of almond butter that cost $11. I could see the stickers still on it. She left the receipt on the counter. I didn't touch it for a long time. I just sat there, looking at that little curl of paper, and I thought, this is how it starts, not with a fight, not with anything dramatic, just a receipt on a counter and a woman who used to say hello. My name is Iris. I'm 68 years old, and I have lived in the same house in Oakville, Ontario for 31 years. My late husband Norm and I bought it when our son was 4 years old, and the backyard still had a rusted swing set left behind by the previous owners. We kept that swing set for 12 years longer than we needed to, because Norm said it gave the yard character. I think he just didn't want to deal with the bolt situation. I retired 3 years ago after 26 years as a records administrator at a regional hospital. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was mine, and I was good at it. When I left, my supervisor said I had the most organized filing system she'd ever inherited. I framed that in my head, even if I didn't frame it on the wall. Norm passed away 4 years ago. Heart attack, very sudden, no warning anyone would recognize as a warning in time. One morning he was standing in the kitchen eating toast over the sink the way he always did, and 6 days later I was sitting in a funeral home, choosing a casket. I still don't fully understand how life allows that kind of jump cut. After he died, the house felt enormous. My son. I'll call him my son, because that's who he is. That's all he is. That's the whole of it. He lived about 40 minutes away in Burlington with his wife and their 2 children, a boy of 9 and a girl of 6 when all of this began. I adored those grandchildren. I still do. That part doesn't change. About a year after Norm died, my son called and said they were having some financial trouble. His wife had left her job to be home with the kids, which I understood, and his income was covering most things. But the mortgage on their place had gone up with renewal, and some months were tighter than others. Could I help with a few things here and there? Of course, I said, of course. I want to be clear about something because I've thought about it a great deal since. I did not help because I was afraid of losing my son. I helped because I loved him, and I had the means, and I believed, the way you believe things when you haven't yet learned not to, that this was temporary, a rough patch, the kind every family goes through. The first thing was $500 toward a car repair, then 3 months later, $400 for a dental bill that their insurance didn't fully cover. Then irregular things started, quiet and gradual, the way water gets into a basement, not a flood, just a slow seeping that you don't notice until the smell tells you it's been going on a long time. I began covering their Costco runs, their gas, the kids' hockey registration, which, if you have never registered a child for hockey in Ontario, I will tell you it is not a small number. I co-signed a line of credit so they could replace the furnace in their house. I didn't think much of it at the time. The furnace needed replacing. The winter was coming. What I didn't see, what I was too close to see, was that their standard of living had quietly attached itself to my savings the way ivy attaches to brick. Slowly, thoroughly, and in a way that does real damage when you finally try to pull it away. My daughter-in-law's name is Sherry. I want to be fair to her because fairness matters even when it's difficult. She is not a cruel person. I don't think she sat down and made a plan. I think she simply got comfortable, and comfort, when it goes unchallenged long enough, begins to feel like entitlement. That is its own kind of danger. The kale chips and the kombucha and the almond butter, those were for her. She had started doing this thing where she'd pick up groceries for both households, and leave the receipt on my counter. I would transfer the amount to her by e-transfer, usually within the hour. I never questioned the receipts. I don't know when I stopped questioning them. My granddaughter, the 6-year-old, a fierce little person named after Norm's mother. She was the one who first made me feel something I couldn't ignore. She came to visit one Saturday in October, and we were sitting at the kitchen table doing a puzzle, and she looked up at me with those serious grey eyes and said, "Grandma, why do you always give Mum money?" Children ask questions the way surgeons make incisions, straight through to the thing. I told her it was just how families help each other sometimes. She considered this with great seriousness, and then went back to the puzzle. But the question stayed with me. It followed me into the evening and sat with me while I heated soup for dinner and kept me company while I tried to read and couldn't. Why do you always give Mum money? Because I love you all, I thought. Because I don't want anyone to struggle. Because your grandfather is gone and this is how I stay useful. Because I'm afraid that if I stop, I'll stop mattering. That last one was the one I hadn't let myself look at directly until that moment. November was when the dinner happened. My son had suggested I come for Sunday dinner, which I did most weeks. I'd drive up the QEW, bring something, usually a pie or a good loaf from the bakery on Lakeshore, and we'd eat together and I'd help get the kids to bed if they wanted, and then I'd drive home. It was the best part of my week. I counted on it. That Sunday I arrived at 4:30. The house smelled wonderful, something roasting, something with garlic. I came into the kitchen and Sherry was at the counter. She acknowledged me the way you acknowledge someone you see every day, which is to say, barely. My son was in the basement with the kids. I offered to help. She said everything was fine. We sat down to eat at 5:30. The children had chicken fingers and the kids sides. My son and Sherry had a beautiful roast, golden and fragrant, with roasted potatoes and green beans with almonds. It was a kind of meal you'd make when you wanted to feel like things were good. I had a bowl of leftover pasta from what looked like earlier in the week. I'm not sure they thought about it. I think that's the part I've had to make peace with. It wasn't malicious. No one thought, let's give Iris the leftovers. They simply didn't think about Iris at all. I ate my pasta. I complimented the roast, which I hadn't tasted. My son said it had turned out well. Sherry talked about a renovation they were thinking about for the upstairs bathroom. Subway tile, a new vanity, the whole thing. She mentioned a contractor they'd had in for a quote. I did not ask who was paying for it. After dinner, while I was loading the dishwasher, Sherry came into the kitchen with her phone. She'd been looking at a spa retreat, she said, a place up near Collingwood. 2 nights, some kind of wellness package. She showed me the screen. It was $480 per person. She was going with a friend, she said. End of January, after the holiday craziness. And then I want to describe this accurately, because the accuracy matters. She tilted her head slightly and said, I was thinking you might want to treat me, kind of a Christmas gift situation. I looked at her. I looked at the phone. I looked back at her. She was smiling the way people smile when they expect to be told yes. I said I'd think about it. I drove home in the dark, and I thought about it the entire way. The lights on the QEW smeared in the rain, and I thought about a woman who had just served me 4-day-old pasta while she ate a roast, and then asked me to pay for her spa weekend. I thought about my son in the next room, who had not brought out a 3rd plate of roast. I thought about how I had co-signed for their furnace, how I had paid for hockey, how I sent money by e-transfer inside the hour, always, never questioning. I got home and I stood in my kitchen for a long time without turning on the light. In the morning I called my friend June. June has known me since before my children. We met at an aerobics class in 1987, which we both quit after 3 sessions, and we've been close ever since. She is not a person who softens things unnecessarily. I told her everything, the dinner, the pasta, the spa request, the furnace cosign, the Costco receipts. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Iris, how much? I hadn't added it up. I did it while we were on the phone. 18 months of helping here and there. When I said the number out loud, June made a sound I won't forget. It was just over $23,000. I sat with that number for the rest of the day. I'm not a wealthy woman. My pension is reasonable. Norm left me comfortable, but not extravagant. $23,000 was not nothing. $23,000 was my roof, eventually, my car maintenance, my ability to stay in that house for another decade without panic. I also called my financial advisor that week. Her name is Patricia, and she has the particular gift of explaining things clearly, without making you feel foolish for not having understood them sooner. She walked me through my RSPs, my TFSA, my projected pension income. She was not alarming about it, but she was honest. The rate at which I had been supplementing my son's household was not sustainable past a certain point. What would happen, she asked, if you stopped entirely? I don't know, I said. I think you might want to find out. I went home and I sat with that too. The weeks between the dinner and Christmas were strange ones. I went to my son's house less. I told myself I was busy. I brought smaller things when I came. A coffee cake, a book for the kids, instead of handing over e-transfers before I'd even taken my coat off. Sherry noticed. I could tell by the way she went quiet around me in a particular way, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. My son called me one evening mid-December. He said Sherry had mentioned I seemed distant. Was everything okay? I said I was fine. Just tired, the holidays. He seemed relieved by that answer. It worried me that he seemed relieved by that answer. It worried me that he seemed relieved. Christmas Eve, I had the grandchildren at my house. We baked shortbread and watched a movie, and I let them stay up too late, and we had the kind of evening that reminds you what the whole thing is supposed to be about. My granddaughter, this serious, direct, wonderful child, helped me measure the flour and told me at length about a book she was reading, about a girl who kept bees. I listened to every word. When my son came to pick them up, I walked him to the door. The kids were already in the car. He hugged me and said, "Thanks, Mum. You're always there for us." I didn't say anything. I just held on to the hug a moment longer than usual. January came cold and grey the way January in Ontario always does, as if the month is making a point. I spent a lot of time thinking. I went for long walks along the lake when the path wasn't iced over, and I thought about the woman I had been before Norm died, and the woman I had been since, and whether those two people had the same spine. I thought about the pastor. I think about the pastor more than seems reasonable, even now, not because it was the worst thing. It wasn't. It was a symptom, not the disease. But there's something about being given yesterday's leftovers in someone else's kitchen while they eat the good thing in front of you that makes you understand your position with a clarity that argument never quite achieves. I called Patricia again. I asked her to help me set up a clear boundary, a formal one, documented, a monthly amount I could transfer to my son, a fixed number, disclosed once, with the understanding that it was the whole of it, no more ad hoc, no more receipts on my counter, no more co-signing for anything. She helped me draft a letter. We kept it simple and without accusation. It said I loved my family. It said I wanted to continue helping where I could. It set the monthly amount at $300, direct deposit, consistent, reliable. It said clearly that this was the full extent of what I could offer going forward, and that I had made this decision after a careful review of my own retirement finances. I did not send it by email. I printed it and brought it in an envelope. I drove to Burlington on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-January. My son was at work. Sherry was home. I asked if we could sit down. We sat at the kitchen table where I had eaten the leftover pasta. I put the envelope in front of her. She read it. I watched her face while she read it. I won't describe what I saw there, because I want to be fair, and what I saw was complicated. When she finished, she put it down and looked at me for a long moment. "We'll need to talk to your son about this," she said. "Of course," I said. "I've written him the same letter. I'll give it to him tonight." I stayed for tea. We didn't talk about the letter. We talked about the children's report cards and a show she'd been watching. It was almost normal, except that it wasn't. My son called that evening. He was quieter than I'd heard him in a long time. He asked if something had happened. I told him what I told Sherry, that I'd reviewed my finances, that I wanted to be responsible about my retirement, that I loved them and the $300 a month was real and dependable, and I would keep it steady. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The line of credit, Mum, we've been counting on being able to use that." "I know," I said. "You'll need to refinance that on your own. Patricia can give you the contact for a good mortgage broker if that would help." Another silence, long enough that I could hear the television in the background. "Okay," he said finally, not warmly, but okay. It took 3 months before things changed. I won't pretend there wasn't a coldness. There was. Sherry's texts became infrequent. My son's calls got shorter. I still came for Sunday dinners, but the energy was different, careful, like the first weeks in a new job, when everyone is performing pleasantness because no one knows yet what the real rules are. What changed things was my granddaughter. That serious, grey-eyed, direct child. It was a Sunday in April. The kids had been outside and came in with muddy boots, and in the chaos of boot removal, my granddaughter planted herself beside me on the couch and leaned against my arm with the full, unconscious weight of a child who feels safe, and said, "Grandma, can you come to my school thing next week? It's about my bee-book. I'm presenting." I said, "Of course I would come." She said, "Good." I told my teacher my grandma was coming, and she said grandmas are the best audience. Something moved through my chest that I don't have a clean word for. Not quite grief, not quite joy. Something that happens when you remember that you matter to someone in a way that has nothing to do with your bank account. My son drove me to the school event, just the two of us, Sherry home with the younger one, who had a cold. We sat in little chairs in a classroom decorated with paper bees, and my granddaughter stood at the front and explained with absolute authority the waggle dance that bees use to communicate the location of flowers to the rest of the hive. On the drive home, my son was quiet for most of it. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." I kept looking at the road ahead. "I didn't notice," he said. "I genuinely didn't notice how much you were doing and what it cost you, not just the money, the everything." I asked him what made him notice. He said he'd sat down in January and actually looked at the numbers, what was coming in, what was going out. He'd seen my contributions itemized for the first time instead of just as a background fact of his life. He said it was like looking at an old photo of yourself and realizing you'd been much thinner than you'd thought, or much heavier, a sudden seeing of something you'd managed to avoid seeing. He said Sherry and he had talked, really talked, the way they hadn't in a while. They were refinancing. She was going back to work part-time in the fall, once the youngest was in school full days. They were making a budget, an actual one, written down. He said, "I'm sorry we made you feel like the leftovers, Mum." He didn't know about the dinner. That he landed on that word was something I'll carry for a long time. I told him I accepted his apology. I told him I loved him. I told him that the 300 would keep coming, steady as I'd promised, and that I was glad. I didn't tell him about the 23,000. I decided that number was mine to carry. I'd taken it out of a savings account and set it back in my mind as a lesson paid for in full. Some tuition costs more than others. Spring came slowly, the way it does along the lake, reluctant and beautiful. I started going to a Tai Chi class on Thursday mornings at the community center, something I'd been meaning to do for 2 years, and kept deferring. I started having June over for dinner on the first Friday of every month. I started a book club with 3 women from the hospital I'd stayed in loose touch with and hadn't made proper time for. June came with me to pick out a new armchair for the sitting room, a good one, the kind with real support for your back, soft grey fabric, the kind of chair you buy for yourself because you intend to live in it for 10 years and you deserve something that holds you well. I put it in the corner by the window that looks out over the backyard. In the afternoon, The light comes in at an angle that makes everything look warmer than it is. I sit there in the mornings with my tea. I watch the birds at the feeder. I think about Norm and his swing set and his toast over the sink and the way he always said that a house with good bones would take care of you if you took care of you, if you took care of it. I think he might have meant more than the house. Patricia called in the fall to do a check-in on my accounts. She said things were looking much steadier. She asked how I was doing in a way that meant more than the finances. I told her I was doing well. Actually well, not the polite version. She said, "Good, you deserve to be." I've thought about that sentence more than I expected to. The simplicity of it. Not, "That's great," or "So glad to hear it." Just, "You deserve to be." Somewhere along the years of loving people and managing everyone's pieces and keeping the records straight and making sure things were in order, I had quietly removed myself from the list of people I was taking care of. I don't think I noticed when I did it. I think it happened the way the ivy happens, gradually and then completely. What I know now, sitting in my grey chair with the afternoon light coming through, is that putting yourself back on that list is not selfish. It is not a withdrawal from love. It is, in fact, the thing that makes it possible to keep loving properly, with your eyes open, with your feet on the ground, with enough left over to give what you actually mean to give, instead of what you've allowed yourself to be quietly emptied of. My granddaughter came to stay for a weekend in October. She brought the bee book, which she had now read 4 times, and she read parts of it aloud to me while I made dinner. She told me bees will stop foraging an area entirely if the energy cost of getting there exceeds the energy they'll gain from the flowers. She said this as a fact, the way she says most things. She wasn't making a point. She's 8. She was just sharing something she found interesting. But I thought about it for the rest of the evening, and I thought about it while she slept down the hall, and I thought, that small creature knows something worth knowing. You don't keep flying toward flowers that cost you more than they give. You simply stop, and you find a better field. I think about that receipt on my counter more than I should, a small curl of paper. Nobody put it there to be cruel, and somehow that made it harder to sit with, not easier. What I've come to understand is that the way things unfolded in my life wasn't random, and it wasn't simply bad luck or bad people. It was cause and effect, plain and slow and patient. Every time I transferred money without a word, every time I absorbed a cost without naming it, I was teaching the people around me what to expect from me. I taught them that I was available without limit, that asking was always safe, that there would be no line because I'd never drawn one. Sherry didn't invent her behavior out of nothing. I watered it, quietly, for 1.5 years. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with, but I think sitting with it honestly is part of what it means to live with a certain kind of integrity. Not just being kind to others, but being honest with yourself about what you're doing and why. I was giving because I loved them, yes. But I was also giving because I didn't know how to stop, because stopping felt like withdrawing love, and I had confused the two things so completely that I couldn't find the seam between them. June asked me how much, and I had to add it up on the phone. That moment, realizing I didn't know the number, that I had been moving money out of my life without tracking it the way I would have tracked anything else that mattered, that told me something about the state I'd let myself fall into. A woman who spent 26 years keeping meticulous records at the hospital had stopped keeping records of her own life. That's not generosity, that's a particular kind of disappearing. What pulled me back wasn't anger, it was clarity. Patricia laying out the numbers calmly, June asking the right question without softening it. My granddaughter at the kitchen table, asking in the direct way that only children can, "Why do you always give Mum money?" Not accusatory, just genuinely curious, as if the answer might be interesting. The answer, when I finally found it, was not very interesting at all. I gave because I hadn't decided not to, and deciding, actually sitting down and deciding, with full information, what I was willing to do and what I was not, turned out to be the thing I'd been avoiding without realizing I was avoiding it. There is a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It doesn't raise its voice. It prints a letter and puts it in an envelope and drives to Burlington on a Wednesday afternoon. It sits across from someone and says, "This is what I can give and this is where it ends, and I am not angry and I am not leaving, and I need you to understand both of those things at once." That took more out of me than I expected, and it gave back more than I expected. My son came back, not because I forced him, not because anyone made him, but because when I stopped making it easy to take me for granted, he had to actually look at what was there. And what was there was his mother, still standing, still steady, still willing, just no longer invisible. I think the truest thing I learned is this: you cannot pour from a cup you've handed entirely to someone else. Knowing when to hold on to it, that's not selfishness, that's the condition of having anything real left to give.